So Graham Moore's just updated us on his election petition. So apparently, Reform UK, Sarah Petition, and the opposition in this legal claim, for this Runcorn and Helsby by-election and the police officer and the returning officer and Royal Mail and so forth, they were trying to claim costs of, I think it was £22,000 to Graham Moore. Now, the High Court have actually apparently knocked this out, so Graham Moore doesn't actually have to pay the costs if he wins, right? So I think they're just waiting now to get the result of the actual election petition itself to see if they can get the recount. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean whether Sarah Petition will lose her seat or not, unless there was something wrong with the counting and she didn't actually win by 6 votes. But we don't even know where the ballots have been kept since... Well, it's November now, since, I think it was May, was it, or something like that? Oh, no, sorry, the 2024 general election, so... We're in 2025 now. Oh, no, sorry, yeah, it was the by-election, not the general election. Yeah, since Mike Amesbury since he punched somebody and then stood down, so that's what happened. It wasn't the 2024 general election, it was a by-election. So, in fact, the general election needed to be challenged. That's what they should have done. They should have challenged the 2024 general election, and they should have challenged Nigel Farage and Tice and Lee Anderson as well for election propaganda. But anyway, Graham Moore has challenged it on the basis, just the Runcorn by-election, on the basis only of the counting, right? So it's just purely the counting process, so not the actual voters themselves. But if they're cheating in the counting, how do you know they're not cheating, switching or replacing ballots, or, whether or not... how do they know what the turnout... What happens if they add ballots in or take ballots out, right? So you don't even really know what the turnout was, Although I think that they've got, his supporting chart now. When you go in, they do mark it off on a separate sheet. It's not just the actual ballots, so I think that probably there will be something strange going on there. But this is the thing. When I did my petition campaign and the police came and seized all my stuff illegally, completely and utterly illegally, absolutely completely. This actually was petition material, right? I mean, it's not protest or demonstration or random. It's actually to promote the petition, yeah? I went to collect that stuff from the police station and the stores, and it all vanished, right? So even a police station is not safe or secure. My when I posted some of my advertisements through Royal Mail, even though it was, with a proper tracked item that was meant to be sent back to Belfast, right? It was on its way back to Belfast. It vanished. So even the Royal Mail stuff vanishing. So if my artwork can vanish in Royal Mail when it's actually logged in the system, what's all the point of having all this technology to say, it's on its way to Belfast now, right? It never gets there. It does not appear when it gets there, And then even in a secure police station, it's your possessions. The police are meant to investigate criminals, right, for stealing your stuff from your own house or from your garden or from your workplace or from wherever, right? This is actually stuff going missing from a police station, right? So, I don't, they're messing around with these court cases, right? And they're doing all these election petitions. It's costing, £5,000 deposit. There's all these people involved, police, returning officers, and so forth, courts. But where have the ballots been stored since the by-election? Who's got possession of them? Has the returning officer got them? Are they kept in the local council offices in a safe? Where are they kept? I can probably type that in now and tell you, actually. Right. So they're safe somewhere higher up, right? Under the representation of the people Act 1983, the returning officer, usually a senior official of the local council. Well, that's the guy who is the returning officer. That's the guy who challenged as being corrupt, right? Has to ensure that all ballot papers, counterfoils, and the polling clerks' marked copies of the electoral register are safely deposited with the clerk of the Crown in Chancery, a senior officer of the Lord Chancellor's Department. This is so that if any corrupt or illegal election practices are reported, which they aren't very often, I don't think, because no one can afford to challenge it, the appropriate documents are available for inspection, right? So they do go higher up. But if you're challenging that the process was corrupt in accounting, right, how do you know, that there wasn't any more? How do you know, who's even following or watching it? I mean, I don't trust them at all whatsoever, to be honest, from what the police did to me, from, even Royal Mail, what happens to things in Royal Mail. Things seem to go missing whenever they want them to go missing, even if it's now registered and tracked on digital systems, So apparently it goes to the Chancery, right? So fair enough, right? So they're meant to be kept in the Chancery. So they're going to get recounted if Graham Moore wins his claim. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Sarah Poitrin will lose her seat then. But for what Graham Moore has paid, £5,000, he's put his self at risk of being bankrupt, although now that they said that if he does win, he doesn't have to pay it, so that's okay now. But from all the hassle from it all, and the amount of money involved, and then, the respondents were saying, it's going to cost us £22,000 or whatever in costs, which is quite a lot of money, and it's only going to obtain a recount, right? All this effort just for a recount, right? They're not going to hold the by-election again, right? It seems a lot of money and a lot of effort for just to get a recount, when I know that there is a lot of electoral crime going on, and the whole introduction of social media has completely and totally corrupted the processes, because there are many MPs who are using parliamentary contact and mixing it with election propaganda material after 14 days after elections, which is having influence and effect all year, and for other parties, and therefore helping other candidates standing for other parties and so forth. It's meant to be separate once you're elected and declared, and then you're serving your electors. Elections are over, right? And then you've got the whole Nigel Farage stuff with talking pints, and then it questions the whole BBC, questions the whole television, how they're presenting people. I mean, I've just complained to the BBC because Donald Trump's been complaining, and the BBC boss has had to stand down now because of the BBC editing, Donald Trump to make it look like apparently he said something he didn't say or meant something he didn't mean to do with that White House protest march thing or whatever, right? But when they were giving this Donald Trump story, this is like the international news, right? Or the national news, not like, calendar or some local news. They got messages coming across the bottom of the screen saying like, Nigel Farage says this or Nigel Farage says that. Like Elon Musk tweets, basically, Elon Musk is drinking a milkshake or whatever. Basically, famous people who are getting anything they say or do, basically free commenting, right? In shared to the whole nation, which is completely, totally scandalous. Now, this is the thing, right? I'm in West Yorkshire. I am in West Yorkshire. Our MP is Iqbal Mohammed. He's an independent MP, right? Nigel Farage is not the MP in West Yorkshire. He's the MP to people at Clacton-on-Sea, right? That's his area. If I email him and contact him, I want to speak to him, or even send him information, his team say, what's your postcode? And if it's not a postcode in Clacton-on-Sea, then they don't want to speak to me or have anything to do with me, right? Even though traditionally, really, if it's an issue or matter of Clacton-on-Sea, I do really have a right to speak to them about it, even if I don't live there, right? But he's there for a surgery between him and those people in that area, or even at a stretch, if you want to challenge the rules to someone who has got a problem in Clacton-on-Sea, even if they don't live there, which that's a very important issue to raise, right? Now, Farage won't answer questions or speak to anyone if they're not from Clacton at the moment, right? And he hasn't even got a telephone number. You can't leave him a telephone message, right? Reform members don't even put a telephone message number up, which means that they can't be popular, right? They must be getting a lot of complaints. Like the Green Party won't put their numbers up either. They're anti-communication, right? They're not like pro-communication. But this is the thing, right? Nigel Farage, if he doesn't want anyone to contact him or speak to him about anything because they can't contact him, then that means that what interest has he got to speaking to anybody else if they're out of Clacton, right? Yeah, on his social media platform, it's flooded with, comments from all around the world, from Dixie, from Kansas, from Timbuktu, from Australia. There's all kinds of people commenting and saying all sorts of things to Nigel Farage on there, which other people in Clacton can see, interfering with their communications with him, right? This is the problem with social media. Now, even the press, right? Farage really should only be answering press questions to Clacton if it's like the local BBC in Clacton, local radio in Clacton, local, if the BBC do a regional broadcast or regional news in Clacton, right? Or ITV or the newspapers for Clacton area, right? Because if you telephone him or email him, he doesn't want anything to do with you if you're not from Clacton, right? So that's his surgery area that he's reckoning that there's loads of strict laws and rules around it, right? Now, I'm in West Yorkshire, and they're popping up messages coming across the bottom of the screen saying, oh, Nigel Farage says this, Nigel Farage says that about Donald Trump, or Nigel Farage says this about the State of the World Address, whatever, right? But, so Nigel Farage wants people in West Yorkshire to be receiving official statements and messages from him, right, as an MP, because why the fuck else would he be interested in what he says if he wasn't elected to Parliament, right? But we're not allowed to, he wants us to hear what he's saying, right? But when you email him, he doesn't want you to hear even what he won't comment. It's no comment, I can't speak to you, no comment, right? But he does want to comment because he wants the world, he wants the nation, the world to hear his opinion and everything. So why is it when I email the cunt, right, and his office secretary says, oh, what's your postcode? No, not yours, so we can't speak to you. But he wants to speak to us. But it's strict parliamentary rules. So where are these strict parliamentary rules, right? Now, if BBC Clacton speak to him and they put it out in the Clacton newspaper, fair enough, right? Now, a minister of the Crown, right? A minister of the Crown, they're ministering the business of Parliament to the nation because they are the government, right? Like when you have a ministry of justice, and also ministers of the church. The Bishop of Lincoln is ministering Christianity to Lincolnshire. The Minister for Canterbury is ministering religion to Kent, right? Now, the ministers of the government are ministering the business of Parliament to the nation. So they're accountable to what the government is doing. And this is when the BBC has them on, right? And they invite them on the news, right? And they ask them questions, hold them to account. Oh, why did you put the tax up this much? People aren't happy about it, Minister, right? They are communicating and updating us and informing us and responsible for being accountable for what they're doing in law to the country, right? That's the government. And that's who the BBC have on, the national news, right? So what the absolute flying motherfuck is a local MP, Barry Shearman, Lindsay Oil, Blackrod, right? Nigel Farage. It's just Nigel Farage of Clacton-on-Sea. Why are the national BBC flagging messages scrolling across the bottom of the screen like, Elon Musk's having a chocolate fucking milkshake or whatever? It's like we're the taxpayer and some MP, right, apparently lowly MP from, he's not a minister, right, in Clacton, who won't answer sweet FA to anyone. He won't even put a telephone number on there. Speak to Leanne, because her face ain't fucking listening if you postcode it from here. But he's not doing that. He's like, where's those strict protocol? We've got strict protocol. I can't speak to or answer for you if you're not from Clacton, right? But that seems to be diminished and disappeared when the national news is on, right? And it's like, Nigel Farage picked his nose coming across the bottom of the fucking screen. Who the fuck's Nigel Farage? I'm in West Yorkshire. Oh, it's an MP from the south of England. Who's the fucking MP for Dorset? I don't fucking know. It's got nothing to do with me here, right? Who is this man? Is he the king? Is he the Prime Minister? Who is he? It's like he's some sort of fucking Jeff Bezos or... who the fuck is Nigel Farage? But who is he? I mean, who the fuck is Nigel Farage? Now, if, somebody threw a milkshake over him, right, in Clacton, maybe it might get on in the newspaper in Clacton, or our local MP had a milkshake thrown over on him. Just like Mike Amesbury, right? It's local news. Mike Amesbury MP had an incident, but it's not an incident. He didn't trip over and bust his face open on the floor. It's just a comment. John says this, Jack says that, Bill, Bob, Tim, Tom, Sam, Jack, Paul, John, it's like, a man walk through, it's like the fucking Irishman, Englishman and Scottishman joke. A guy walks into a coffee shop in fucking Llandudno and asks for a fucking Costa coffee. It's coming across the bottom of the fucking screen on the BBC. Man walks into a cafe in Llandudno and orders a fucking Costa coffee. Who the fuck wants to know that? It's not fucking news, right? You know what I mean? Now, if it's like, Lord Anningfield's bankruptcy fucking scandal or something, an MP from a remote area of England, Clacton, has been involved in a very serious scandal or something, maybe that might, be enough to reach the national headlines, but not every fucking word. It's like the fucking Bible, isn't it? Man cannot live on bread alone, but every word and breath from the mouth of God. It's like, who the fuck is Nigel Farage? God! The nation cannot live on bread alone, but from every breath and word from the mouth of Nigel Farage, as long as you don't fucking contact him through email, and, don't bother ringing him because speak to the hand because the face ain't fucking listening, right? Don't call me, I'll call you. I'll call all of you. Why are the BBC publicising this? It's beyond the scope of the powers and remit of an MP's jurisdictional area and role, right? Their role is it's not a ministry, it's actually a surgery with local people. Now, I checked up on the word surgery, right? Surgery is to a remedy or injury, right? So like doctor surgery. So it's to correct remedies and injuries, right? With local people for the local area. That's the remit and powers. So Farage only has a reach, really, for remedy and surgery of issues and problems in local matter, which can be remedied in Parliament, right? Now, if he's in Parliament, the newspapers do go there, right? Now, the national newspapers can report on what is said in Parliament because it gets put in Hansard, right, in the galleries. So when they're having a debate, right? So when Nigel Farage is in Parliament doing some work for once, when he bothers turning up and he's actually doing his job and he's speaking in Parliament, right? and it's getting put in Hansard, right, because it's a parliamentary debate with other MPs from other areas about the national affairs, then the newspapers can comment on it, right? But when Farage is not in Parliament and he's not engaged in a debate in the chamber between the other MPs, which is getting put down on record in front of the Speaker or Assistant Speaker for the country, right? He's not. You get elected to travel to Parliament to speak in there and vote and get put on the record, right? You don't get elected to comment on what the fuck Donald Trump's doing or things that are... When he's not in Parliament and it's not actually getting put in Hansard, actually, the newspapers aren't actually supposed to be putting out what he's saying or doing, right? Unless he's in Clacton in surgery with his locals and he wants to comment on a local matter in fucking Clacton, right? So, what is Farage's name doing scrolling across the bottom of the fucking screen on national BBC News if it's not about Clacton and if it ain't something that's putting hands in fucking debate? He's not ministering the business of the government. He isn't entitled. And that's the word, entitlement, right? Nigel Farage is not entitled to minister the business of the government. Now, he's not a foreign minister of affairs. He's not a minister of foreign affairs. So why is he commenting on what the fuck Donald Trump's doing or whatever? Or even if there's an incident in the, Sun newspaper, like fuck knows, fucking power station explodes or something. Was it in Clacton? If a power station explodes in Cumbria, right, on the fucking coast, they've got an MP, right, in Cumbria to comment on it. That's his job. And they've also got a Minister of Energy, which I think it might even be Ed Miliband, I'm not sure. So that's what the Minister of Energy is there to comment on. So, what is it, Google Ads or something? What is Nigel Farage's fucking name and anything that he says, does, or whatever the fuck opinion he's got about anything at all out of Clacton on fucking Sea or in the Chamber of Parliament, right? Why is it scrolling across the bottom of the fucking screen on national BBC News? Who does he think that he is? But why is the BBC doing it? Is he God? Is it like every word, people in Clacton cannot live, the nation cannot live on their own MP alone, but every breath and word from the mouth of Nigel fucking Farage. This is it. What are the ministers? Farage is not entitled to minister the business of government, right, at all, nationally, or interests of government, nationally, at all. He's entitled to remedy grievances, injuries, and issues and problems of people in Clacton-on-Sea, right? Now, he's got a political party, right? But when he's acting on behalf of a political party, that's party political promotion and material. Now, party political material is not to be issued by the licensed TV stations or newspapers outside of an election campaign or process. Was that anything to do with an election campaign and process? No. So why the fuck should Nigel Farage or Reform be getting any publicity? If it's Reform UK, we shouldn't hear the words Reform UK unless they've paid for them to be heard, right? Unless there's a pamphlet they've paid for, unless it is a radio advert they've paid for, unless it's a television advert they'd paid for, or Google ads they'd pay for, or Facebook ads. But I'm even doubtful on that because it's from overseas and foreign territory now, and the policy is not lawful, right? And there's a lot of Reform pages that have still got their election material up, right? After the 14 days after the election, which is still having an effect, an advertising effect. Do they continue to play Reform UK on the fucking radio after the election's over? No, right? So this is the thing. Now, I know that political parties have got candidates coming in and out all the time, but they're not even asking him if Farage had a candidate standing, in fucking a by-election in Grimsby, and, but even then, why would they be getting a comment from him on that if they weren't getting equal comment from someone else on it? It's... Why? They're covering the process of the election. They're not giving out comments from, the favourite party or second favourite party about what they think about it, because what they think about it has got actually, they have to pay for us to receive their opinion about their candidate or the election, right? So this is why Graham Moore, what's the point in challenging the election? Now, this is the thing, right? You've got to understand that before 1868, this was all being dealt with by Parliament, right, for elections. They didn't have these courts, right? You did a petition to Parliament. If you complained about the election, right, you could petition Parliament as long as you're from that area and you participated into it or witnessed it, right? You might have actually been able to complain about it if you had some evidence or fact or something, if you were out of the area, but if you knew about a crime that took place, right? But it was all under the investigation powers of Parliament and jurisdiction of Parliament. Yes, sheriffs helped and organised elections, but for parliamentary elections, the sheriff is answerable and accountable to Parliament for his processes and investigations. He's not doing it under the jurisdiction of the local courts and so forth or whatever, right? This is why you're meant to have all these returning officers and that, right? Now, after 1868, they said the courts were allowed to hear these because it's a lot more convenient, and they sent judges there, and they had local trials and so forth. And they made it so up to 4 people could complain. Now, you got to understand, right, what actually is happening. All it is we need people to go into Parliament, and we've got to vote for them, right? And everyone's going to go and cast their votes, right? And it's, we're paying for it all, so it needs to be organised. And then they go around and collect the signatures and at the polling stations and blah, blah, blah. It's all checked to make sure it's legitimate and not cheated, right? And then your MPs go in. Now, this is where you need to understand, right? If you accuse them of not doing that legitimately, you would just petition Parliament and they'll get a committee to look into it, right? But that would be based on the testimony and evidence of witnesses and what evidence that you've got, and they would look to see if the evidence is correct or not, right? And they could say that that person wasn't elected or someone else was elected, right? Or they could even have the election again. That's just Parliament committees looking into it based on evidence. Now, the courts have taken over that process. All you're doing is saying that the process that they did wasn't legitimate, or someone cheated in it, or the ballots weren't wrong, or but then there's all these rules about the advertising for fairness, right? And to make sure that someone with a shitload of money don't come along and basically buy the election, pay unfairly, effectively to put someone in Parliament purely on their financial powers, right? By undue influence. This is the thing. Now, all this effort, like Graham Moore's gone into, fair enough, if he thought they were cheating in that process, and if he really believed that, then he should call them out on it, and maybe it was worthwhile. But this is the thing. If you want to just get Sarah Putchin out or get Reform out, right, and get someone else in, then you can just go collect signatures on it at any time. you don't have to have an election petition to challenge if the process was done legitimately or not when they did run the process, right? Because even when they do the process and when even they do it legitimately, it's still, all it is a lot of people's signatures, right? It's people with an official record writing down that they want someone in Parliament. But you can petition that you don't want someone in Parliament, or you can petition to remove someone or to have another election again. You can ask for whatever you want with a petition, right? Now, here, look, we've got Keir Starmer, right? 75, I think the electorate was 75,475, but now they're saying the electorate's gone down to 71,300. So there were 71,300 people in Holborn St Pancras, but only half of them turned out, 54%. So actually, there was only like half of the people in St Pancras bothered to turn up and vote. Now, I think Starmer got 26.4% of the whole electorate, but remember that 54% of them didn't turn out. So the other, just under 25% was split between the other people. But Starmer only got 18,884 signatures. So Starmer has been put into the House of Parliament with only 18,884 people are holding him in there, right? Now, you might think, well, what happens if someone would have had an election petition to challenge that? They could have done if they'd had some evidence. It's a 5,000 deposit to challenge an election. But you don't need to challenge an election, right? That was a process which counted votes, but you could do your own process. Because when you go around the houses and when you collect signatures, right, you're not relying on the government who have gone out of their way to organise and sort it all out, to have people there to make it a lot easier and convenient for everyone else, right? You can go out of your way, right, to your inconvenience or your effort or your money even, depending on how much, it might not cost you any money if you just walk, right? If you've got the will. I walked around the village with, probably about 3,000 people. I did it in 2 or 3 days, and I actually got bruises on my feet, and I ended up hurting one of my toenails and getting a bruise on it, right? And as part of it actually came up, which wasn't very nice. And because I was wearing really hard boots and I actually bruised my toenail, I was walking that much. And the local councillor was using loads of propaganda to try and get the local people on social media not to not support my petition and to stir up trouble when that's actually not allowed. That's it's a contempt under the misconduct against petitioners, right? To disparage people from signing a petition, right? Or deterring them. So, the people can have their own opinion, right? Or they're only supposed to have their own opinion because the council itself is not supposed to affect people's opinion in causes. So, when people start to do these things, like, one person makes a massive effort, and goes around, puts a massive burst of energy or huge amount of effort in, right, what on an entire village, right? Councillors don't like it because what you're doing is you're taking the initiative and you're using a will. You're using strong will where there's a will, there's a way, and you're going out of your way, and they're like, oh, just a minute, what's going on here? I'm the councillor here, I'm in charge of what goes on around here, and they don't like it because, they like to rely on the normal electoral processes because that's what puts them in place, right? But when someone else has got a really strong will and they want to go around with other people independently and say, right, we don't want this person in, or we want someone else in, they've got the right and power to do that by the number of signatures. It just takes effort. Now, you actually could use money instead of effort, right? You could, just buy, you can get 10,000 flyers for, $100 under 100 quid now, like 80 quid or something. You can get 10,000 flyers printed, and you can probably get someone to deliver them, for about, 200 or 300 quid around the whole thing if you don't want to walk around yourself, right? Now, I don't know, that won't afford to knock on doors and get the signatures, but they'll put them through a letterbox for that. If you want them to actually go and speak to people and knock on houses, it'll take a lot longer, because people won't be in during the daytime. They might be only in on an evening, or they might not be interested or whatever. But you're looking at more money, right? So as you increase the money up from 300 quid to 600 quid to 1,000 quid, or if you've got other people like yourself who are really passionate about it and want to do something, they will volunteer, right? That's charitable. And if they know what they're doing and they've got belief and faith in it, and they're not being lied to, deterred, or talked down by people who really don't want them to do it, because, this is very fierce competition and opposition. These Conservative parties and Labour Party go out of their way to put their, election material up everywhere when it's time for election. And they even took, they took George Galloway's stuff down, right? They don't want someone else to, they've spent a lot of money on it from their party. They don't want someone else to actually, do their own little, sort of like, do the rounds and go out of their way to bother to ask people. But this is the thing. There's all these petitions with all these signatures, but they're just asking for the wrong things, and they're not asking for the right things, for the things that they want to be done. You've got like Tommy Robinson. He's like, waltzing through London with an army of, 150,000 people to possibly 3 million, depending on what the true account was. The police said they turned away 2 million people or something like that. I'm not too sure which is the truth or not. But shouting out, they were chanting Keir Starmer's a wanker, right? Now, those people could, very easily go around Holborn and St Pancras and get, 18,884 signatures. It wouldn't even take that many people. In fact, there was that, what the electorate, just a minute, it was 71. There's 71,300 people in Holborn and St Pancras. Now, there was meant to be a minimum of 150,000 people turned out at that. So that means you've got more than one people to go to one house. That means that there was more than enough. There was more people turned up for the Tommy Robinson demo than the people that there are in Holborn St Pancras, right? Now, that means that you could have had, if they'd have all split up and separated, Tommy Robinson could have had, well, if it was true that he had up to 1 million to 3 million people who really were trying to turn up at that march, not 150,000, right? Tommy Robinson potentially, if he was switched on and knew what he was doing, he could have had 3 people stood on every doorstep in Holborn St Pancras. 3 people asking if they'll sign a bit of paper, to say, get Keir Starmer out, right? Now, to say that 50% didn't even bother to turn up to vote, so they definitely weren't supporting Starmer, you could potentially get half of Holborn and St Pancras to sign it, and then, the other third of them or whatever didn't vote for him anyway. You most definitely could get more than 18,884 signatures, right? For sure. You could probably get, what was this, 71,000 there, 20. You might even be able to get 50,000. I don't know, depending on, how polite or persuasive you were. But if you've got 2 or 3 of you, you get a lot more confident. But obviously, depending on what time of day it is, because everyone's not always in. Some people are on a holiday. But you can at least try and knock on the doorstep, and then if they're not in, you can't speak to them, then, put something through and ask them to sign it and send it into, a PO box or, Tommy Robinson headquarters or whatever, right? So it's actually extremely, extremely easy to get all these signatures, right? Now, the only thing is that, people don't believe in it. They don't believe that if they get the signatures that they can get Starmer out, or that he has to come out, or there has to be another election. But there is. It's true. Because an MP is democratically answerable to his electors, right? And the Recall of MPs Act was definitely, according to the House of Lords reports, an additional, it wasn't a replacement, it wasn't to replace any other process. It was an additional, supposedly an extension or more accountability. So when they committed crimes and so forth, it had to be reported. And then there could be some action, because even if they've committed a crime and it gets reported to Parliament, then Parliament can't remove them unless the public have to remove them still, right? So that's it's gesturing back to democratic accountability, only consequentially from criminal accountability, because they can't actually be removed from criminal accountability unless they're democratically removed, right? But they can be, this is the thing, you can democratically remove them anyway. They don't have to be criminally accountable to be democratically accountable. Because if you believe that the Recall of MPs Act is the only thing, then that means that democratically accountability can only arise out of criminal accountability, not democratic accountability arise of itself, right? Because that would mean that they're not democratically accountable. It would mean that they're only democratically accountable if they're criminally accountable, and that's not the case. And in fact, MPs are not meant to be criminally accountable while they're in Parliament sessions. They're only meant to be criminally accountable outside of Parliament sessions, or if it is an indictment, the proceedings can continue or be initiated during Parliament time, but they're meant to be free from arrest and so forth and so forth. But then, so really the Recall of MPs Act is meant to be for between Parliament sessions so they can get removed and so forth, unless it's really serious. But even then, even if they get convicted, you still have to wait until between the sessions, right? That's how it's supposed to traditionally work. And when you read the Privileges Committee reports, they're leaving out all the acts of law. There's like 5 or 6 acts of law which actually say that you have to be caught of record during Parliament session, or a indictment, which was a felony, right, not a misdemeanor. Which that is correct to the short Parliament, John Pym, which is like MPs aren't accountable for misdemeanors while they're in Parliament service. You have to wait until in between. Some MPs stand down, like Mike Amesbury, but Mike Amesbury didn't even... You see, that Runcorn and Helsby by-election shouldn't really have taken place. Mike Amesbury didn't know how to defend himself properly. He hadn't studied privileges. He didn't know them properly, and Parliament didn't help him because they're not helping anyone. I really don't know what's going on with the MPs at the moment. There's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with the committees. There's something wrong with the MPs. And they're not doing the law properly. And the police don't really understand politics properly. The police go to police college and they're taught criminal law, and they go after criminals in a local area. Police officers are assigned to a county, to a jurisdiction, and their job is to go after criminals. And they can't get their head around the fact that there is particular civil democratic engagement which is beyond the scope of criminal law, and you're not acting as a citizen. You're not acting in a personal capacity as if you're robbing a bank. You're not acting in a personal capacity as if you are, filling up your car with petrol and driving away from it, or, stealing sweets from a sweet shop. You're acting on behalf of the public interest, because you're collecting the interest of the public with your own case. Now, the police are doing casework for criminal offences to a magistrates court. They don't understand that you become you're engaging in polls, local polls, and promoting that politics. You're engaging in making and changing the law, right? You're not complaining that, someone had a fight at Oasis gig and the police turned up and shut down the festival, and everyone is protesting to get back on again because they paid for the tickets, and they've got to go out at the weekend, and if they don't get back on the gig, then they've lost all their ticket money, so they want to get back. They're having a protest, right? And then they all start chanting "Let us back on," or they get their pen out of the car and write on a big sheet of plastic they find in a skip, "Let me back on Pigscum," or something like that, whatever, right? That is not a democratic petition by a matter of record to the Parliament of England, or advertising such a thing. It is a protest which arises out of an incident, right? Which is what Fiona Rose Diamond was talking about, when the police would when she was going around Newcastle the other weekend, right, or whatever, and she was like, the police would try to stop her from doing a protest, but it was like a spontaneous protest, right? That you can have a spontaneous protest. There's a lot of confusion about the words protest and demonstration in those public order acts, because they're confusing. You can have protests and demonstrations, but they don't understand that you've got privileged ones as well, which is totally different, which is accounted for right from the start. They did have these sedition meeting acts. They've tried to shut down petitioning a lot in the past, but it didn't work, because you can't do it, because since the Bill of Rights, they even said that most of the other acts have been repealed. They had the seditious meeting acts, which were temporary. They only lasted, they expired, right? The Tumultuous Petitioning Act, they couldn't stop you from doing it. They never stopped an individual person from doing it, or a small group. They only tried to stop large activities without permission. Once you got permission, then that was it. You had the police couldn't do anything, because you got consent and a court order, which basically was just a way of helping to validate what you're doing. They couldn't shut it down, even without the Signature Bill of Rights, because you've got the observation of due process of law, right? Which is that the community can come together, to set their case in writing and complain to the government, right, and King, and that is the observation of due process of law. That is before any of these police acts, before any of these, that's 1368, right? You got Magistrates Act, and you've got local other crimes and so forth under the hue and cry. But you're observing the due process of law, right? You've got the case, but you're not going to get a warrant from the sheriff to arrest someone. You're not going to get a warrant because people can't be arrested, right? The whole purpose of the act was that people actually were using that jurisdiction and getting people arrested and trying to hold them to account to Parliament, and they were abusing the powers by arresting people, and so forth without warrants. Now, you're not allowed to actually arrest someone or be arrested when you're engaged in observation of due process of law, right? But that includes also the police. You're not allowed to go around and arrest people because you're setting your grievance in writing to the Parliament to tell them about it. You're not going and arresting them, or getting a warrant for them. So, this is civil messing process. The police, you don't go to the police to get anyone arrested for a parliamentary grievance, but also you can't be arrested while you're going around conducting it, right? You need to get your head around this. The local police officers haven't got a squiddly diddly. They can't get their head around it, because the problem is that they've got all these uniforms, they've got all this authority, they've got all this equipment, buildings, and they're doing all this training, like I'm a trained police officer, and they can't get their head around the fact that we live in a country, in England, not, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, China, Russia. We're in England, right? When you're in England, right, and when you are raising a matter to a higher authority than the local bobby, right, The local Bobby can't get his head around that suddenly you've got statutory powers, and that is just what this country is. And Bobbies like uniforms, and they like handcuffs and truncheons and powers, and they like to go on the plod, and they like racing around, tearing around in police cars with lights flashing, right? A Last Action Hero, but they don't actually, they can't get their head around in this country, right? That you got powers. Now, you know, so what do is they, you know, your shit goes missing in the police station, you know, they're having to put their hands behind their back and cross their fingers, you know. They don't like it, particularly when you're actually complaining about them and their activities, right? Your shit goes missing in the police station, or your stuff goes missing in Royal Mail, because this is corruption, right? Or they go grab, oh, we want a bit of this action, you know, we'll do a bit, we'll join in, you know, we'll cat plays with the ball, right? You know, we'll join in, you know, we'll crush Paul Golding's van, you know. Oh, he's got Keir Starmer's wanker on the side. This is exciting. It's like when a dog turns its head on, you know, when you got a dog, you know, and it turns its head sideways, and it goes, you know, like the dog's like, it turns its head sideways and it doesn't quite know what's happening. It's a bit puzzled. Like the dog, it just tilts its head, like, and then it just makes a noise like that. Like the police is like, what's going on here? Paul Golding's driving around in a fucking van saying Keir Starmer's a wank, can get the cunt out, right? He's got a political party, right? He's a leader of the political party, right? The party members have paid for it, paid for by the sponsors of Britain First and, you know, Britain First, right? Not like, you know, paid for by the ITV or whatever. It's paid for by the political party, right? You know, like Nigel Farage gets a free fucking Costa Coffee comment across the bottom of international fucking TV. Like Nigel Farage says, he disagrees with fucking Elon Musk that chocolate milkshakes are the best. Like he prefers strawberry milkshakes, like, or whatever the fuck comment he's got that, you know, no one needs to fucking know what Nigel Farage thinks about anything, right? You know, this is the thing. The police officer's like, oh, you know, local crime, hate crime, ooh, you know, but it's, you know, it's like dog turns its head on the side, you didn't quite know what to do, you know, it's like a cat, oh, shall I play with the ball on, I don't know what to do, you know, it's like, yeah, it's a political party, it's classy material, you know, he's got people are giving money. The public are supporting the party. They might turn up and vote for the candidates, yeah? It's for the public good, for the good of the people who want, you know, to support that person. It's a public campaign. It is a private crime. It's not like Paul Golding himself, you know. I'm not Boris Johnson. This is Boris Johnson Limited. You know, this is not Paul Golding the citizen, you know, walking around kicking a bank machine in. This is like the Britain First party, right? Engaging in the electoral process. Now, if, you know, the police want to say, well, there's no election on, you know, or you didn't pay for that, or whatever, then, you know, why weren't they prosecuting the Conservative Party for that M&S Thatcher advert, you know, ridiculing Lilliputian Ed Miliband? They didn't, right? Because it was on a billboard, and, you know, you know, the little doggy had a sniff at it, you know, and he smelled that, oh, it's a legitimate, you know, political party campaign, right? But when they see Paul Golding driving around in his van going, you know, it's like, puppy, power, let me at him, you know, it's like, police don't understand. It's like, you know, doggy doesn't understand, you know, cat wants to play with the ball. So it's like, oh, you know, this is exciting now, police officers get involved in this. So it's a police press office, you know. Now that'll mean something. We'll get Keir Starmer in the police press office and put some pressure on him. No. You know, like leave it. You know, it's like, how can you get there to stop the fucking dog chasing the stick or whatever? You know, this is the thing. So this is the problem with the police. But, you know, from my experience, they've got absolutely no respect at all for political rights. I don't know if it's because they don't understand them. They're meant to have access to police, barristers, lawyers, KC, QC. This is the problem, but it's actually it's contempt of Parliament, right? So, you know, this is the thing with the police. And then you've got the government knocking these acts out, which are misleading intentionally, right? Like demonstrations and protests, but they're only certain demonstrations and protests, right? Because even if you look at the riot acts, it tells you there's a differentiation all the way through the riot acts between personal private crimes and public causes, right? So this is the thing. Paul Golding, really, there's all this money being spent on campaigns and people throwing money at these political parties and political causes when, if they just volunteered themselves or volunteered money to pay for people to go around or pay for flyers printed and put the right question on the paper, said the right thing, and targeted the right area, like, Holborn and St Pancras, they could just, extract. They could get the public in a certain area to extract these people and have them replaced by different MPs, even Speaker Lindsay. And this is the thing, I'm not disrespecting Speaker Lindsay, like, he's just meant in humour, but effectively, Speaker Lindsay is only there because people in Chorley voted him in there, right? And once he's in Parliament, then the MPs who have also been voted in by the public can choose a speaker, right? So you've got David Davis and Cat Smith go and grab Speaker Lindsay and put him in the chair, right? But only because we grabbed him, put him in Parliament, right? Because Parliament conveniently went out of their way to arrange, all the signatures to be collected conveniently for us and be professionally counted, so there was, no cheating going on, right? But that doesn't stop someone else going around and collecting signatures at any time to prove that the people don't want them in Parliament, right? And to get them removed. And those signatures can be checked. When they do the recall petition, it has to be done within so many days, but that's for that particular process. And you don't even have to get anywhere near this 18,884 for Starmer. You only need like 10%, which I think is less than that. He got 26%, so half that. 26, less than half of that, so less than half of 18,000. So, 9, something like, 9 or 10,000 signatures could recall Starmer, right? But that's after being criminally accountable. And there's even some question about what that Recall of MPs Act, how it's being used, because the privileges of Parliament are meant to protect MPs from arrest or imprisonment during session time, which Mike Amesbury completely didn't have a clue what the fuck he was doing, right? Always being misled, and that means that if MPs are being misled and they don't know the law properly and they can't get the proper legal help, then how are we supposed to get any help from MPs when, we're getting we're not getting our rights upheld? That's what Fiona Rose Diamond was doing, like in Newcastle. She was going through with the protest with a lot of people, and then the police were about going to arrest her and jump on her, right? And she's like, whoa. She read them the rights, right? She get the law, but it worked because the police didn't know the law. This is how. But that's like the tip of the iceberg, right? That's just an example that's like the mountain. There's a mountain under the molehill, right? And that's the problem, which is actually widespread everywhere, just on a larger scale, because they don't actually know the law. So, this is the thing. But, Starmer can actually be removed by just going around and collecting more than 18,000 signatures. But there are so many massive movements now and huge numbers of people turning up at protests and loads of money being thrown at causes that all it takes is someone to click, to realise without being scammed or misled by the clerks in Parliament or by, members of Parliament who actually don't want you to remove them. It's like they're not going to roll the red carpet out for you and put a fucking flashing sign in illuminated letters saying, here, if you're going to remove Cat Smith MP, roll up here, just collect the signatures and, we'll actually carry the box for you. Yeah, it's like Cat Smith's not going to say if you want to remove me, just do it this way and that way, and then put them there, and then I'll help you carry the fucking box in, while I'm carrying my stuff out of the fucking office, right? They're not going to help you. They're actually lying to you. And this is the problem with, Sarah Poachin and her lawyers with this Graham Moore case, right? Because they were even trying to claim costs against Graham Moore, when they're the respondents, and even if Graham Moore won, they were trying to claim costs like 22,000 or whatever, because they were doing everything they possibly could to put a stop to it, and even sort of apparently it was just ridiculous what they were even, they just lost the plot, right? This is what Graham Moore was saying, if he wins, then, why should he have to pay the money, right? So that when they're doing these processes, but being a Sarah Poachin she's not got any incentive to be honest and truthful, particularly when her party campaign leader is Nigel Farage, who cheated himself and used talking pints to boost his popularity, right? You know, they're misled. They've got false gurus. You know, they got false. It's like, you know, they're being misled. It's a hierarchy of misleading in order to obtain and gain power, rather than being honest. Now, maybe the honest person is a person, you know, loses. You know, obviously, Parliament's there to be robust, right? MPs are not supposed to be deterred from their work and so forth. But that's meant to be by the courts, criminal courts and police. What's happening is that their actual protection and confidence is actually being diminished and cut into from the police, right? By this Recall Act and so forth, and they're not applying the rules properly, because people used to, before the 1800s, people used to try to arrest the MPs for private and civil suits. Like, oh, you know, we're not arresting Keir Starmer because, like, you know, he owes you a pint, or, you know, like, you know, he owes you a hot dog or something, or he didn't pay you some money for his jacket tailoring suit that you fucking made for him or something like that. Therefore, you're going to get him arrested, right? We've abolished all that. But that's what people were doing. Those are courts and places outside of Parliament. If they've done something wrong in Parliament, like contempt or treason, or if they're not following the rules of Parliament, they are to be held to account only in Parliament, right? By petition to Parliament, not through any intervention from the courts, councils, tribunals, or other places, right? But unless Parliament vote on to have an inquiry into it under their authority and jurisdiction, or directed by them, like the triers of petitions. The triers of petitions obviously were directed and instructed through and under the authority of the House of Commons, right? Not the other courts. You know, MPs now are only allowed, they're not allowing us to complain about them or call them out when they're doing something wrong. They're trying to censor it and actually say that they're not accountable. They are accountable in Parliament through Parliament processes. And that's the problem. They're only allowing e-petitions now to, you know, ask for amending and strengthening of laws. But that's what Labour are doing through their own business anyway, amending and strengthening of laws. So it's like they're trying to make up that that's all there is, the amending and strengthening of laws, whether it's by private bill, political party, or by petition. But that's not the case. It's actually for all manner of grievances to do with Parliament, including conduct of ministers, evil ministers, and actually judges as well, and so forth. But that's meant to do with the House of Lords and why they got the Judicial Conduct Investigation Office. They've separated a lot of these powers, like delegated them to the Ombudsman or to the Judicial Conduct Office now, and so forth and so forth. But they're trying to make out that there isn't anywhere that MPs are accountable to, which, you know. And they don't want us to be able to use their website if we have got a complaint, because then they call it scandalous or frivolous or vexatious, you know, petitions. But if it's the truth, and if your claim is, you know, legitimate, then, you know, frivolous and scandalous, vexatious suits, libelous suits are ones that are untrue or false, right? Not that they're legitimate and you've got a strong chance of winning because you're right and they did do something wrong and they have committed treason or felony, or they have been, you know, putting policies in place which completely and totally contradict standing orders and don't make any sense, or obstruct the purpose of Parliament, which is to be called to address grievances and amend and strengthen the laws. By the time we've finished, they're trying to make out that it's only there to amend and strengthen the laws, and that, you know, e-petitions is just an alternative to MP surgery or a private bill, or, you know, will Parliament are just doing it anyway on their manifesto, right? Amending and strengthening the laws is actually only part of, you know, you're meant to oppose private bills for amending and strengthening the laws, or propose them. Public petitions is meant to be for all manner of grievances to do with, like, it can be anything to do with the whole country. It can be conduct of MPs in Parliament, because that's the only place. But you see, when the Labour Party are, the cabinet, and when they're in control of Parliament and they're, the majority on committees, they're not wanting to actually take action against their other colleagues or other members of the party, right? Unless, only if you have to literally touch someone, you have to commit a sexual offence now, or headbutt someone, or punch them, to even be up for, to be called out, and then it's the police you have to actually get them convicted officially, criminally accountable, and it has to be open for the court and an order made. And then they come to us and say, oh, now you're democratically accountable because you were criminally accountable and a judge said that you committed a crime. So now the public are allowed to remove them. Not like, oh, well, actually, the public aren't happy with them and they change their mind and they don't want that MP representing them anymore, right? And they're doing things in Parliament they don't want them to do. That's democratic accountability, right? Not, well, what? Since when can democratic accountability only arise resulting from criminal accountability, right? Maybe this is the thing like Graham Moore was saying, if I get blacklisted, I can't stand to be an MP because, I got some criminal offence or something and I can't stand, or being blacklisted or whatever, right? That's sort of that kind of basis or model. But that is removing the eligibility to be democratically accountable because you're not allowed to be democratically accountable, right? Pure democratic accountability is not if you've been disqualified or if you've been penalised for some crime. It's got nothing to do with criminal accountability or eligibility to stand for election. Because if you ain't got eligibility to stand for election, you ain't fucking democratically accountable to anyone. Well, you aren't. You are because you can't stand. But how do you get... You get put into Parliament resulting from you were eligible to stand and then you had to get put in by the votes, right? And then being put in and taken out by votes is pure democratic accountability. Now, these MPs, they like to get put into Parliament, but they don't like to be brought out of Parliament when they're not performing to what the people who voted them in, or other people who decided not to vote at all and didn't have opinion because they weren't bothered either way, but suddenly this government is doing things that actually they're getting ticked off about, so now they're deciding, right, okay, now we have got opinion and we do have a say, and you don't have to have it on that day. You can go and, that's what petitioning is about. See, that's what a grievance is, And this is the thing. If people in Holborn St Pancras suddenly say, oh, just a minute, half of them didn't turn up to vote, but then suddenly, the MP in their area, is doing things that they're not happy with, then, they can remove them. They do have an opinion. What the MP's doing is actually, he's generating political interest in what he's doing to the negative, right? Which, means that, he can't be keeping the nation happy and he's not keeping his local area happy, right? And there's nothing wrong with going around the doors and houses and asking them, to get their opinion and get it down on record and then send it in and say, look, if there's 20,000 people in Holborn St Pancras who aren't happy what Keir Starmer's doing, right, maybe they should have another MP, right? He doesn't have to have committed a crime or criminal offence, but... This is the thing. If he's doing something wrong in Parliament, if he's engaging in contempt or treason, he can't be accountable in the courts. He's meant to be accountable in Parliament before a committee. When we get a committee hearing through asking for one, they're not letting us ask for it or putting any evidence up because they don't. If we're right and if it's correct, they don't want us to be able to win. And they don't want us to have a case. And this is when you go back to a corrupt Crown Prosecution Service who pretend they're doing all these tests and pretend they're following all their strict and complicated rules, but they're not disclosing evidence that would undermine their case. And when members of the public contact them as witnesses, and they say, oh, these people have got rights in effect, like when you ring the police station Now they've got a message on the Met Police that you aren't actually allowed to speak to people in custody or get through to them, even on rights issues. They get told their rights. Anyway, they're not getting told their rights. The Met Police are totally disregarding the basis of, like, in COP 10 form, when you merge joint parties together. When people are all signed to a political cause, they're acting on behalf of a public cause, a writ of record. They're not acting in their personal capacity in a personal crime or offence. They're not acting in a personal capacity. It's like when you give someone, when you go to the charity shop and give them, like, a jacket, you're acting on a charitable basis. And under tax law, you can only give them, so many things, right, without paying tax. You're acting in a different legal capacity. When we're engaging in political campaigns and it's a body of people who are joined by a petition, all of those people have the right to represent the rights for the body. And the Met Police are blocking us from doing that now, right? By phone call when they're in custody, which that's an obstruction, but it's contempt. I would say that's contempt itself. To have that message, if someone potentially is under an arrest when they've got, political right in effect, and, it's going to be the Attorney General, like under the First Public Order Act, right? Their fellow petitioners have a right to make representations on their behalf and speak to them and advise them on them, right? Otherwise, they've been obstructed from their rights. That's against the criminal procedure rules, on the rights of the defendant. It's against the 2005 criminal procedure rules onwards, right, for sure, because the needs of other causes, the needs of other cases. This is what duty solicitors are meant to do. None of the duty solicitors have called the police out on this at all. None of them. None of the duty solicitors have gone into that police station because, I'm representing them, right? And this is the thing with, like, Fiona Rose Diamond and Extinction Rebellion and the other people, right? They've got a cause, an existing cause on the observation of due process of law, right? Under the overriding objectives, the needs of other cases are the rights of that cause of all the members, and for the members to protect other people engaged in that cause and case, right? They're allowed to make representations. That's one of the things that is forming the overriding objectives, the needs of other cases and the rights of the defendant. The Met Police are obstructing that for sure. Now they're blocking it. That is against the criminal procedure rules, and it's a contempt of Parliament. So, and they've got that through the whole force and telephone system. This is the thing with cops. They're criminal, and it's, who's responsible for it. It's Sir Mark Rowley, but he's, going into committee meetings with the government, and he's corrupt. Because he thinks he's Sir Mark Rowley, he's got his Superman costume on, flying cop, flying policeman, the flying Scotsman, and he's got pure Dutch courage, but he's a criminal. His force is completely and utterly breaking the criminal procedure rules, because they still believe that in the Public Order Act, the words demonstration and protest applies to parliamentary ones, when it doesn't, right? There are some rules for being around Parliament, but that's actually under parliamentary law, actually, as well. But still, they can't stop, like, one person, or a small group of people from going in and presenting a petition, right? That's just the general, protests and things like that. That's what the suffragettes were kicking off about. They were wanting to get themselves into Parliament when that 1661 Act says that, only 10 people can present it, right? And the rest of the Act was being ignored, right? It wasn't even being enforced. So that's what the suffragettes were trying to do, right? They were like the 1688 Bill of Rights. They believed was effective, like, implied repeal of that Act, the 1661 Act, right? And it kind of had done, but not that clause on going to Parliament. So they were trying to make a point out of it by that's what all the main arrest cases and prosecutions of the suffragettes were for that issue, right? Because otherwise they were going about their business and they weren't having to go to the courts and they weren't having to get permission to collect all the signatures and stuff like that. So they were actually doing quite well. The only problem with that thing with the suffragettes is that, after this, when they get the vote, they took all the juries away. So it was like, they got powers for women, but then they lost a lot of powers to do with these corporations. And it's actually more important what gets done and passed through local councils in a local area in respect to the country and planning and what the country turns into, what it becomes, because that's to do with orders and decisions at a local level. And we had that power taken away or given up, right? When we're supposed to have it in Magna Carta. And instead, they wanted the vote, but yet they just all the women then end up either voting for one of two main parties. So all that women fighting for the vote, right? When after they got it, all they ended up doing is all the posh women voting for Tories and all the working women voting for Labour. So, and it was just split voting as if you'd only got, well, only if the men, or the middle class men were split between voting for Labour or Tories. I mean, if you're going to get the vote, what's the point in all the working class women fighting for the vote and then just voting for one party? Oh, now we can vote, because it was like, all you're doing is increasing, it's like five-a-side football. What's the point? You got five-a-side football, and then you've got, a massive football team. What's the difference? Well, on this, it's five-a-side. Yeah, you still, kick the ball in. What's the point? You're just upscaling it, right? But it's the same thing, effectively, right? It's like there wasn't that much difference. All they did is upscaled what they already had, right? So if you've just got, people voting for Tories or Labour, well, actually, it wasn't Labour, because Labour wasn't invented until the 1900, right? But, Whigs or Tories or whatever. And then you just, it's like, it's just pointless, because it's like, instead of having, two balls, one's like, it's just, if you got two balls, right, and they're both, like a yellow ball and a red ball, one's like, 5 centimetres and the other, then you've got two balls and one's like 10 centimetres and the other's 10 centimetres. What's the point? Because you just got the same thing, but just upscaled. So it wasn't like other women got the vote and then, there's all these different... If they'd have started their own parties, or if the women had started all their own parties and then ended up being at 10, 20, 30 parties, and there was all kind of diverse views. But this is the thing, what these big parties do, they learn to, all these corporations and propaganda and so forth, and it just seems ridiculous. Rather than all these women standing for Labour, why didn't they stand for themselves? You've got all these Labour women in Parliament now. You've got... there's Dame Diana Johnson, you've got, Lisa Nandy, you've got all these people who want to be a politician, right? But why stand for Labour? And I'll tell you why, right? Because they're not getting elected, because everyone just votes for Labour. But you're not voting for that person. You're just voting for Labour. What's the point, If I stood for an MP, I want people to vote for me because they knew I wasn't going to bullshit them, right? And I'm going to Parliament and lie. And I won't try to take over the fucking world with my fucking Chinese government and, all this, bullshit, right? This is the thing, Why vote for someone who's a bullshit merchant or just like a product package? It's like the fucking Avon lady coming round, isn't it, It's like, what's the point? These women are, it's like they might as well not turn up. This is the thing. You might as well just put Labour on the fucking voting thing, and then, when you go to the election, there's no one stood there. You just put like a fucking... It's like on that BBC programme when you had that strange plant thing moving around, like the flag. You might as well just put the fucking flag there and everyone salute it, like the Labour flag. Well done. And not have any people... What's the point in having someone represent you in Parliament? Because you might as well just have a vacancy seat on there saying Labour, Labour policies, automatic voting on Labour policies. You might as well just, you might as well just have, like, you know, what's the point in having MPs in Parliament? You might as well just put, like, you know, those little vacancy sign, you know, when you have a restaurant, when you have, like, you know, this seat is taken or whatever. You might as well just put, like, you know, Labour manifesto, I vote Labour, right, on each seat in Parliament, and then the Speaker can just look round, and then, you know, he didn't have to have any behavioural problems. He can say, oh, look, all these seats are reserved voting for Labour, right, you know, like, you know, what's the point in them, you know, because if they're just going to go with their policies and manifesto no matter what, then what's the point in debating it? Because you can't persuade them any other way. It's like Starmer. When Starmer says, right, if you don't vote Labour, you won't stand for Labour again, right? If you're going to be a Labour MP, right, and Starmer says to you, right, oh, right, you'll never stand for Labour again because you voted the other way, why would you vote the other way? Well, you'd only vote the other way if your electors come into surgery and persuaded you to, or another MP had got a better argument across the debate. But Starmer says that if you get persuaded the other way, then you're not going to stand again for Labour or be in the party. So what the fuck are we debating? What are you fucking debating? What is the debate? The debate is to argue what is the best thing to do, right? So other MPs from other parties are trying to persuade the reasons why MPs should or shouldn't vote for a certain policy or law, right? That's why you're there to debate. Starmer says, if you don't vote how he says, then you're fucking kicked out of the party and you'll never stand again. So what the fuck? What the absolute motherfuck are you fucking doing there? Moving your fucking mouth in the chamber. Why are you moving your mouth? Why are you putting your hand up to speak? You know, because it's written down on paper. This is the Labour manifesto. Only put your fucking hand up when it's time to vote. Don't move the mouth. This is the thing, you know. It's like Prime Minister's questions. What's the point in the Speaker fucking pointing at you to speak? You might as well have the fucking reserve fucking sign on the chair. And most of them do, because there's nobody turns up to fucking be in debates. It's like when Danny fucking Kruger is in there, you know, and there's no one in there. There's like 3 people there. What is the point? What are they debating for? It's almost like, you know, it's just independent MPs who turn up to argue in debate or whatever. You can't have a debate. And this is the thing. With a local council, it's the same. If you've got a strategy which is long-term and involves a hell of a lot of money, and these big companies are planning, then what's the point of the public turning up to object or oppose to it? Because it seems like they've already got a future in history written. They're planning. Private companies are deciding what the future of your local area is going to be, right? Not you. That's people with money and plans and architects, not people who actually live there. Right? So, and this is why it's completely and totally corrupt with all these contracts. It's not a court of civil requests anymore. It's a business contract thing where they're managing to still allow the people to come in and grumble, you know, and, you know, it's extremely difficult, you know, when it comes to things like bus lanes and something, to stop it from happening, you know? Because the executives and the council are just going to come down and rip the trees down, and then they send an inspector there. Oh no, you know, these trees are not healthy anymore. You know, blah blah blah. Same thing we said, you know, to everyone else last time, right? Well, yeah, so what? We were so well leave them there, right? This is the thing. The councils are they're not democratically accountable. They're not democratically accountable authorities. They are accountable to corporations and businesses who put very expensive cases in front of them, just like, you know, people going to the High Court and put very expensive legal arguments in, like these big companies who are like, you know, oh, you owe me 10 billion, or you owe me 20 billion, or you owe me 30 billion, or you owe me 40 billion, right? Or fucking Royal Mail's been sold off, you know, by David Cameron or whatever. All these things, like huge, big things, right? You know, it's not like, you know, a couple of people in a village aren't going to come and stop, you know, it being bulldozed. This is the thing. So, You know, you can collect the signatures. The bottom line is this. It's frustrating when you've got Tommy Robinson, with, 150,000 to 1 million people. You can easily, get him to, chant Keir Starmer's a wanker. And there's all these hundreds of groups who have got GoFundMes or getting thousands thrown at them. And all these protests and marches. But it's great. But if there was a little bit more strategic planning behind it and knowledge and understanding, and people are more resilient to being deterred by these people who don't want us to beat them, right, then that amount of resource and effort could be achieving a lot more and be successful, like, getting Labour MPs out at the moment, which we're not achieving because people don't know where to, target their